My mom played the trumpet when she was young, and she played it all the way through high school, and she auditioned for one music school. She did not get in, and she went to nursing school. So she became a nurse. She stopped playing the trumpet for many years. She didn't pick it up, I think, for like 17 years. She picked it up when I was about in 7th or 8th grade again, and she joined the Cape Cod Conservatory Wind Ensemble, which is now the Cape Cod Concert Band.
Hello, and welcome to episode 15 of the BandWagon podcast for the week of June 3rd, 2024. On this edition of the program, news and notes from the band world, including a Midwest community band goes international, a national band holiday, sort of, some thoughts about how when I say this podcast is written by me, I really mean it, and my conversation this week talks about a new piece of music written for a middle-aged band. I'm your host, Rob Hammerton. Hello, dear listener. Yeah, this episode is definitely all over the place, all over the road, all over the map, swerving this way and that. You may think you've wandered into a newscast, and then a music history class, and then a creative writing class, a bunch of things. Some episodes have a way of either starting out as or developing into themed episodes. This isn't one of them. I hope, though, that it'll have something for everybody, including, as mentioned, a look at a band piece played by a band celebrating 50 years in business. It was played this past weekend, and I was there. And I've got evidence, and I've got the guy who conducted it. So, don't forget your neck strap, because away we go. Let's play the first strain. In this episode's first strain, news and notes from the band world. Dateline, Indianapolis, Indiana. This Thursday, June 6th, the Indianapolis Municipal Band will perform in Normandy, France, as part of the commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion by Allied forces in World War II. The band celebrating its 75th anniversary this year is the oldest all-volunteer community band in Indianapolis and rehearses weekly at Ben Davis High School. John Marshall, the band's director since 2017, visited Normandy last summer in preparation for the performance. He said, quote, "Like all of our programs, we have some up-tempo charging things, and we also have some introspective choral-type pieces. Great movie songs of World War II. We're going to do a couple of jazz pieces. Big band was in vogue in the 1940s. We want to celebrate that. We're going to end with Stars and Stripes Forever, and that's actually at the request of the French," unquote. And yes, the band also will play back home in Indiana. Dateline, Akron, Ohio. The University of Akron School of Music and University Bands have appointed Dr. Michelle Bell to serve as Assistant Director of Bands and Director of Athletic Bands. Recently, Bell completed her DMA degree at the University of Illinois, where she was graduate teaching assistant and instructor for undergraduate conducting courses. She conducted the campus band and worked with the Marching Illini and basketball bands. Previously, she taught at Emory and Henry College in Emory, Virginia. Before that, she directed the sports band at St. Cloud State University in Minnesota. She has done numerous research presentations at state and national conferences, including the College Band Directors National Association National Conference. In 2011, Bell received her commission as a second lieutenant in the Army National Guard. Since then, she has served in the Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota Army National Guards. Currently, she holds the rank of captain and was most recently deployed as a company commander, where she led a company of over 100 soldiers. Bell earned her Master of Music in Wind Band Conducting at the University of Minnesota and her Bachelor of Music in Music Education at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And that's news and notes from the band world for this week. If you have an item you think should be included in this segment, send me a link via email to heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Now we'll take a quick water break and I'll meet you on the other side. I invite you to stay with me. Okay, let's pick it up at the second strain. In this week's second strain, did you know? This week, the first full week of June, is National America the Beautiful Week. Did you know that? I didn't. But that's the beauty of these cottage industry websites that document various days of observances from national holidays to, well, National Cottage Industry Day. I don't know if there's actually one of those. Wouldn't be surprised if there were. Anyway, meanwhile, I read recently that this week is National America the Beautiful Week, and as a band person, I immediately thought, yep, that's a topic of conversation. It's probably a topic of conversation for band people because of, well, that arrangement, which I'll get to shortly. America the Beautiful is not unlike lots of tunes in your favorite hymnal, in that the lyricist and composer probably never met. Someone came up with a nice little poem, and a short time or a long time later, a composer found it and set it to music, or a poet was humming a little folk tune and suddenly words started pouring out of their head that lined up. In this case, Wellesley College English professor Catherine Lee Bates wrote a poem as she witnessed the grandeur of the Great Plains on a railroad trip to Colorado, and years later New Jersey organist and choirmaster Samuel Ward wrote a melody for a completely other purpose while he was taking a ferry home to New York City from Coney Island. You want to get inspired? Take public transportation. That's the lesson here. Anyway, the tune eventually ended up wedded to the Bates poem, and in 1931 the resulting piece of music would likely have been chosen as the national anthem of the United States had it not been for that other drinking song melody thing pushing ahead in line. There have been numerous efforts, particularly during the John F. Kennedy administration, to make America the Beautiful the national anthem, none of them successful. I would support such an effort, but only if we made sure to sing the verse about confirming thy soul in self-control. But I digress, as I so often do. There are 8 zillion arrangements of the song, but one stands out for me, and I suspect that you know which one I'm hinting at. Maybe you've played it at some time. I have a tiny history with it, a good one. It's schmaltzy, and it's sentimental, and it's very nearly way over the top, and I love it. It's the one by Carmen Dragon. I'm wondering if that America the Beautiful arrangement might be Dragon's equivalent of the Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. By that I mean Sir Arthur Sullivan wrote lots of other music in his life, choral anthems, symphonic works, and he wished that those pieces were more successful and better remembered than those silly Pirates of Penzance and HMS Pinafore pieces of fluff. I imagine Carmen Dragon looking at his body of work, which included lots of film scores, including the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers in 1956, and wishing one of those items would be the thing he'd be best remembered for. As an orchestrator, he won an Oscar in 1944 for the Gene Kelly Rita Hayworth musical Cover Girl, which featured songs by Jerome Kern and Ira Gershwin. In 1964, he won an Emmy Award for producing the Glendale Symphony Orchestra Christmas special on NBC television. He was very well known for conducting the Hollywood Bowl Symphony Orchestra. In fact, they performed the Standard School Broadcast, an NBC radio program broadcast in the western United States, which served as a high-quality introduction to classical music for young people growing up in the 1940s and early 1950s. And Dragon hosted a regular classical music radio show broadcast on the Armed Forces Radio Network well into the 1980s. He died in 1984. My favorite fun fact about Carmen Dragon is that his son is Darryl Dragon. Who? Okay, older friends, help me out here. Anybody remember the guy who played keyboards in the 70s pop group The Captain and Tennille? Tony Tennille sang, and Darryl Dragon sat surrounded by several keyboards wearing a signature nautical captain's hat. Where was I? Oh yes, band arrangements. A few years ago, the musicologist Laurie Archer Sutherland wrote an analysis of Dragon's America the Beautiful arrangement, and not long after that article hit the internet, a commenter named Ron Stillwell checked in with an intriguing bit of historical background. Dragon had originally written the arrangement in 1960 for concert band. That I did not know. I had assumed that the orchestral arrangement came first, since that's the direction music seemed to move in during the earliest days of the wind band. Before Holston, Vaughan Williams, and Granger, if a band was playing anything deeper than military marches and novelty songs, it was playing orchestral transcriptions. The arrangement was in fact written for and was premiered by the Ohio State University Concert Band. The commenter, Stillwell, wrote further, quote, "I had the privilege of being a member of the Ohio State Concert Band when we performed it. The occasion was the 30th anniversary of the Ohio Institute for Education by Radio and Television in 1960. It was held at the Bachelor Hilton Hotel in Columbus, Ohio. Carmen Dragon had been invited because of his contribution to the field through his radio show Chevron School broadcast. This arrangement has become the gold standard of the piece, and I feel honored to have been a part of the premiere." Unquote. Currently, the Dragon arrangement is firmly part of the performance repertoire of the community band I'm conducting, and we played an arrangement of the arrangement when I marched with UMASS Amherst in the mid-1980s. One time we played it was during the Minuteman Band's visit to the Massachusetts State House. We played it outside on the front steps of the building, with most of the band on the wide and very deep central steps that went from the sidewalk all the way up Beacon Hill to the State House, but with quite a number of trumpets and other treble instruments ranged along low balconies to either side. I and my drum major colleagues looked around and suddenly realized that we needed to run out to hillsides that were below those balconies to help conduct, so that those other treble instruments could see, well, any conductor at all, since our director, George Parks, was atop a portable podium not terribly visible from out there, since the wide and very deep central steps were full of bandos who were between those balcony-bound treble instruments and Mr. Parks. Also, as you will imagine if you know the Dragon arrangement, the tempo was not exactly steady and reinforced by percussion. Mirroring Mr. Parks' conducting took a whole lot more work and concentration then than it usually did for side conductors out on the 30-yard lines at halftime. Somehow, the thing worked. So every time I get to conduct the Dragon arrangement with my community band, I think of multiple historical facts and personal memories at once, when in fact I should be focused on the actual music. It's a living. And with that, let's pause for breath, and in the trio section, I'm going to talk up a newer composition. Hope you'll stick around. Okay, let's change keys and get into the trio section. This week in the trio section, I'm pleased to be joined by a gentleman whose life began and whose professional life has flourished in a place we Massachusetts types simply call down the Cape. He's a music teacher, a classical and jazz trumpeter. He's a leading light in the Massachusetts Music Educators Association. He's a podcaster, too. We may reference that a bit, who knows. In any case, please help me welcome to the program Tom Borning. Hello, Tom.
Hi there. Thanks for having me, Rob.
Thanks for doing this. You're someone whose name I've known for a real long time, but prior to a week or so ago, I hadn't actually ever met you in person, or I think spoken with you at all, at least to my knowledge. So a pleasure to finally get to do that in some kind of longer form.
Yeah, thank you. When I saw you at the concert, I looked at you and I said, I think that's Rob Hammerton. And the funny thing was, after I said that to myself, why on earth would you think that? When is the last time you've seen Rob Hammerton? And I'm trying to think, was it at a music conference or was it literally when I was in college? And, I recognized you a little bit. But yeah, you're right. I don't think we've really ever spoken.
And that concert I will loop around to for sure, because that's a lot of what I'm interested in chatting with you about and learning a little more about. And our listenership is saying, what concert now? Who? So
yeah.
So we'll get there. And a way that I get to the main topic of conversation in these most times is to throw out a few rapid fire questions just so our listeners can get an initial idea of who they're listening to. So the first question, which I've given away already the answer to, but it's good to hear it from the source. What's your primary instrument?
Primary instrument is trumpet.
There's no origin story about getting into playing an instrument that is exactly the same. I wonder if yours has any particular quirks to it.
My mom played the trumpet when she was young, and she played it all the way through high school, and she auditioned for one music school. I'm pretty sure it was Fredonia. She did not get in, and she went to nursing school. So she became a nurse. She stopped playing the trumpet for many years. She didn't pick it up, I think, for like 17 years, 14, 15, 16, 17 years. And actually now she plays it. She picked it up when I was about in 7th or 8th grade again. And she joined the Cape Cod Conservatory Wind Ensemble, which is now the Cape Cod Concert Band. She had this old Getson trumpet. And it just happened to be in 4th grade that's what we had. And I was like, well, I guess I'll play the trumpet. And that's it. Kept playing from there.
And you've given a tiny under the radar partial answer to the next question, but what's your current band related role or roles?
My current band related role is sort of threefold. My day job is I am the instrumental music teacher at the Morse Pond School in Falmouth, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. I teach 5th and 6th grade band and jazz band, which is an after school thing at my school. The other thing I do is I conduct the Falmouth Town Band, which is a community band that is a summer performing ensemble. And I also conduct the Cape Cod Concert Band, which happens mainly October through May.
So, what bands have you been active with in your life over the course of your life, whether it's playing or conducting or whatever?
Let's see. Well, high school, I grew up on Cape and I was in the Barnstable High School marching band under the direction of Tony Stevens, which was a great marching band. The concert band was very good too, but the marching band is sort of where he hung his hat. Then right at the end of high school, there's a local jazz big band, and I joined them the summer right after I graduated called Door Canteen. They still play around the Cape. And then I went to college, was in at UMass, played in the wind ensemble, symphony band, marching band, jazz ensembles, all that stuff. While there, I played in a merengue band called the Mimi Power Band. I also played, there's probably some great pictures someplace, but I played in a band called the Hills Mills Clowns. And we drove all over the place during the weekends and dressed up as clowns and just acted like complete idiots and played tunes marching down the street. And it was so fun, and back then it was like, $60 a parade. I'm like, yeah, I'll drive for 3 hours each way and we get $60. That was so silly, but it was great and it was a lot of fun.
And importantly, as groups like the Velvet Knights have proved, and Spike Jones and that sort of thing, in order to be funny, you first have to be good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, then I was lead trumpet in the Compaq Big Band, which has a lot of UMass roots, by the way. Al Soloki runs that band, and he was a UMass alum, and there's a lot of UMass people that actually Brian Hilliard is now the lead trumpet player in it. He came in and I was like, oh, you know what? Now I have someone that I don't feel guilty leaving. I'm not going to leave the band high and dry without a lead trumpeter because he'll be able to take over for me, no problem, which was great. So that timing was perfect. I freelance with a lot of other things, but that's probably, I was in the Massachusetts Wind Orchestra. I also played in the Amherst Jazz Orchestra. Cape Symphony I've played with a couple times.
So your resume takes up more than one page, is what it is.
I try to play as often as I can. I really do, and I try to play all styles as much as I can. I always find it funny because so lots of times when I'm on a jazz gig, I think some of the guys go, what's this classical guy doing here? And then I oftentimes think, if I'm playing orchestral work, be like, why is this jazz guy in playing orchestra work? I used to feel that way a little bit at UMass too. I was principal in the orchestra, wind ensemble, and jazz one my senior year, So it was like I always felt like people were giving me a weird stare, like that's the dude from orchestra and he's the lead trumpet in the jazz band. Well, what's going on? Or vice versa. Always funny, but I enjoyed it. I That's from my trumpet teacher growing up in high school. I said one time I was like, I wonder what kind of trumpeter I should be, jazz or classical. He goes, no, you be a trumpet player.
A wise person once looked at me and said, sometimes no transition is transition. In this case, I'm not sure, but as long as we've been chatting about brass a little bit, there was this brass player shared a Facebook post 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and it was about a community band concert happening over the Memorial Day weekend. And I noted that it lined up with an available stretch of time for me, and I thought I could use a little culture. And there's at least one person playing this concert whom I know, so what a fun way to spend an afternoon. And with any luck, being that it was dead in the middle of Memorial Day weekend, the traffic coming onto and off of the Cape might not yet have gotten too crazy. It might just be the sweet spot of get in and get out. And so I said, great, let's do this. And what happened was what could have been, at the very least, a decent little band concert became something a lot more momentous, it strikes me, for at least a couple of reasons. If you've been paying attention to what we've been talking about, no mystery, but it was the Cape Cod Concert Band, and you, Mr. Borning, were conducting, and the centerpiece of the program was a brand new work for band. And I would love to dig into that a little bit.
Sure, yeah, it was Portraits of Cape Cod, composed by Michael Donovan. Michael Donovan got his degree in composition from Boston Conservatory. I think he went to Berkeley as well. He was a music educator, on Cape for a while. He did his student teaching on Cape, but then he taught, I think, on the North Shore. But he was also the band director of one of the local Air National Guard bands, I believe. I hope I'm not screwing that up. Actually, back in 2017 is when he originally wrote the piece, and that's when that piece was actually premiered, but it had only been done once.
Okay.
So for the 50th anniversary, because it was commissioned by the group, that's why we brought it back. I hadn't been involved in that original performance of it. I only found out, I seriously found out 2 days before the concert that previously they had worked on the piece starting in October and then performed it in May last time they did it. This year, we started working on it after our March concert. It's one of the hardest things I've ever had to conduct. And one of the reasons is because I'm the type of person I like to listen to recordings and really have everything, have the piece sort of going on in my head. And I didn't have that opportunity with the new work, you know? So that is a little different, but it was also really fun. And the composer, Mike, was playing trumpet in the band.
It was in the room.
In the room, right. So I was a little nervous about that. I'm going off of his tempo markings and I'm making some musical choices there. And he was really, really cool about it and said, look, you should do whatever you want. Like if you don't like the length of a note, change it. If you don't like, if you think you hear too much of this pitch, take it off of somebody, whatever. And he was really, really cool about it. He sent me a great email after the fact and was like, I was so proud of how you worked on the piece. And I thought your rehearsal timing and everything was great. So it was very flattering. And I was really happy he wrote that email because I wondered what he thought about it, because he's also a conductor himself. So I was really happy with that, and it was really a challenge. But there's also, when they debuted it in 2017, there's actually a painting that goes together, like pictures at an exhibition. There's a painting that goes with each movement. And at the original performance, they actually auctioned off the paintings.
Interesting. It strikes me that there are probably two kinds of composers in the world, and that's one. And the other one is the diametric opposite. It says, don't change nothing. That's enough pressure as it is, but to have somebody actually in the room, I can only imagine.
Yeah, he couldn't have been better. I mean, there were a couple things where he's like, "Hey, I know I put quarter note equals 120 right there. Let's pump that up to like 132. I think it'll work a little better." There were a couple things where
He was editing his own work.
yeah, basically, yeah, yeah.
But he wasn't cracking on you for.
No, he wasn't. And it was really funny. Like every now and then he'd raise his hand, and be like, "Hey, just so everybody knows, there's a lot of subliminal messages in this melody. This one's like it's a combination of I've been working on the railroad and Thompson's Clam Bar, which was a famous clam bar on the Cape back in the day." And this other thing, and he's like, you're going over the bridge, you're going to go to Thompson's Clam Bar, and it's all in like two measures, and it's like the first four pitches, I've been working, and it was like Thompson's Clam Bar, it's like, so it's just really funny. He's like, yeah, the subliminal messages. I'm like, okay, you have a different mind than me. That's very interesting.
There were some program notes either written out or kind of extemporaneously talked about before the performance of it. And so folks like me in the room had a sense that there was a little clam bar jingle coming. And when it hit, it's the kind of thing that without program notes, it's a nice little motif. But knowing that going in, I thought it was a nice amount of information that was offered ahead of the piece so that you could kind of appreciate that a little bit. When you got to the movement, which was the Witt-Tileston bandstand.
Yeah.
This is a longer story than I've got a moment for here, and I'll get to it at some point, I'm sure, because it's a part of my figuring out what a wind band even was. But I am sure that the Chatham Band was the first live wind ensemble concert band that I ever saw in my life. I might have been 5 years old. And so, not to spoil things for people, but I'm going to spoil things for people. When that particular movement kicked into Band Time in Chatham, the march that was written for that band, which I think they never don't play it. That is a musical memory that takes me back a solid half century. And so even though that wasn't specifically spoken of, I tried not to let my chuckle get too much into the recording I was making. I'm also remembering that after the concert, we crossed paths very briefly, and you had described that you had only been working on that with the band since March, since after the most recent concert. And I remember kind of blanching a little bit and thinking that is, not only is that piece meaty, and there's a lot going on in it just by itself, but you didn't exactly water down the rest of the program to accommodate that. There were 6 or 7 other things on the program, I think, and none of them were baby music.
No, it's funny. Replaying that concert in my head, I was actually really happy with all of it. But it's funny. One of the tunes on there it's called Happy Birthday Around the World.
Mm-hmm.
And you would assume with a title like that it's going to be this dorky little whatever. That was a hard piece.
There was stuff to do in that.
Very challenging to conduct as well. Like really, the tempo changes and the transitions and back and forth from 1 and cut time and 3 and 4. It was challenging. Yeah. Haven Dance obviously is another one that was on there. That's challenging, but I've done that one before. Like I know that piece sort of like the back of my hand a little bit. So that's not as bad for me anyways. The people in the band might disagree with you on that one, but yeah.
Well, the people in the band, I'm interested to know how many music professionals there are in the group versus not. I mean, I know for a fact that there are at least a couple of music teachers in that group, and maybe people who gig on a regular basis. But the demographic is very much people, for the most part, who are there because they enjoy it and they want to make music, but they're not necessarily, they're in real life, they're dentists or they're insurance people or they're stay-at-home, whoever they are. And with that in the back of my mind, as long as I'm wrapped up in a community band as well and kind of looking around the room and thinking that more people are here because they want to have a good time and they like to play their instruments than are here to work as if it were a paying gig. And the tightrope that you and I walk as conductors of community bands is how hard do we work a group? What can we realistically expect from a group? How hard do we push when we've got a piece that's a little bit maybe beyond the upper range of where they're used to and all that? Talk a little bit about maybe the demographics of the Cape Cod Band and what that's like.
A lot of it is like what you said. It's mostly people that are dentists, doctors, nurses, and math teachers. There's a Latin teacher in there. My wife's in there. She's a principal. She used to be a music teacher though.
Mm-hmm.
But there's 3 retired band directors in there. But then, there's some current music teachers in there too. Megan Anthony, Rose Richard, Lisa Fournier. The rest of them are all just people that are living their lives. And once I started conducting the Falmouth Town Band, I started to realize how much I love making music with the regular Joe Schmo. I'm not trying to demean them in any way when I say I'm just meaning as a person that doesn't make their living in the music field. In fact, I often say at my Falmouth Town Band concerts, this is why I teach music. Because let's be honest, when we teach our students, Sure, there's great success stories. I have students that are in symphonies and students that are now, better music teachers than me, dang it. But they are. And
Yeah.
I have to, I'm like looking at like a former student of mine in Colorado just crushing it. And I'm like, man, she's way better than me now. You know, but most of my students are not going to be musicians or make their living as a musician. So if they hopefully they go on to wherever community they end up and they join some other community band, or even at the very least, if they go and listen, like, because there has to be an audience as well. And that I keep thinking about that. Like, when I'm 80 years old, are opera companies and symphonies even going to be in existence? Like, who's going to go watch and listen? And the answer is all the people that were involved in music when they were young and hopefully had a great experience and appreciate music. I love that about the community band and the demographic. I have a couple 20 somethings in there and definitely up to, this is people in their 80s in there too. So
And with the kind of people who are in community bands, which is, in short, all over the map from every direction, and it's always a fun tightrope to walk to try and serve everybody's interests. And if you're in a good group, you've got people who are borderline professionals or are professionals who understand that you've got also people who just picked up the instrument or just picked it up after having gone away for a while, or aren't necessarily as interested in tuning that note down to the cent kind of thing. As I left the concert, I had the following thought. Before I arrived, I knew this piece was going to get played and I was interested to hear it. And after I heard it, I thought that is one solid performance of a real, let's not undersell this. That's a hard piece. And then we had a conversation which revealed unto me that you had been working on that piece only since after your most recent concert. And I drove away thinking, holy heck. So I'm trying to think of how many rehearsals that is to put all that together with a group of people who are, again, not all professionals. They're not all at that highest level of preparedness where there are groups that could probably get in 2 rehearsals later, they'd be okay.
basically, I think if I'm being exact, I think it's 9 rehearsals that we had, plus a dress rehearsal. So I guess really 10. The first week right after our March concert, we got in and I was like, all right, I need to hear this Portraits of Cape Cod, like really hear it. So we played through the entire thing. And after we finished doing it, I was immediately super nervous
Mm.
because I'm like, oh my, we're not going to make it. Like,
Oh.
nope, we're not going to make it. So then I was like, I sort of looked at the calendar and I was like, you know what I'm going to do? So now we have eight more rehearsals plus a dress. So every week I'm going to take one movement and we're just going to nitpick the heck out of it and just deep dive into it. And then also work on a couple other pieces that are going to be in the concert. And sort of did that so that then we made it and then felt really pretty confident. And then we had a basically those last 2 rehearsals before the concert to really like get it even better and just sure up a couple, like there's a couple interludes in there that the timing of it was challenging. And
So, what's next for the Cape Cod Concert Band? What's next for the Falmouth Town Band, for that matter?
well, actually, it's funny. Right before we were on here, I was actually just looking at the program for this summer for Falmouth Town Band. I always try to, silly things like I try to get like we have an arrangement of Moonlight Serenade that's definitely older than me in the book, but it's a great little arrangement of it, and I try to put that around a full moon just so like. the chances that we can see the moon while we're actually playing it. I
Mm.
put it late in the program, so it's actually pretty fun. But also this year is a little bit unique. Music educator Lynn Whitehead was a music educator for many, many years, was in Falmouth, and she years ago was like, we need a new band shell in Falmouth. She went to the town came up with the money, and we have just a stunning band shell right on Falmouth Harbor. It's stunning looking, and it's also the sound. The people post videos from 100 yards back from their cell phone, and I'm like, man, I can hear everything, and this is outside on the water. It's incredible. But anyways, so my point with bringing that up is that the shell is going to be named in her honor, and that's going to happen. So I'm planning out the program for that. Her son is a phenomenal trumpet player and a trumpet teacher. I think he teaches at University of Colorado, actually. So he's going to play Bugler's Holiday with me and one of the other players in the band when Lynn is going to conduct that piece. So that was her only request. And she said no speeches, but there'll be speeches. So, and then the next thing coming up for Cape Cod Concert Band, the Cape Cod Concert Band is unique in that we have an executive board and we do fundraising. And so when we get grants, some of that has to do with, they want to know, hey, what are you doing for programming next year? So last couple of weeks, we've been talking about, we have 3 concerts, one in December, one in March, and one at the end of May, and talking about what our plans are for those. So, the Christmas concert is going to be something along the lines of Comfort and Joy or Dance for Joy, something like that. It's usually like half holiday, half concert band music. And I tell you, that's one of the great things I like about the Cape Cod Concert Band too, is that our executive director, Kate Hooley, is an author. She's written for like the Yankee magazine and other things, and she's got some great books out there. Cottage for Sale, I read, and it's just a great book. But she is so good, I'll be like, hey, I'm thinking of this for my theme, and it'll be like some lame title. And she goes, well, what if we word it like this? And it's perfect, and she's
Yeah.
just really, she's great at that. So I'm very fortunate to have her.
Surround yourself with good people.
Yeah, exactly. So
I like Comfort and Joy.
last year it was Holidays in Space.
Sad I missed that. That is right up my alley.
It was great. We did a piece by Brian Baumages called To Dance Among the Stars, which I don't think is one of his more popular ones, and it should be. It's incredible.
Our usual final turn of a conversation that we take is a series of less resume based questions. And the first one that I always hurl out there is, what's one of your favorite pieces of band music that you've played or conducted, either outdoors or indoors?
The most amazing memory, probably still ever, of performing a band piece is the fall of '96 at UMass, and the wind ensemble did David Maslanka's Symphony Number 4, which is a monumental work. We were lucky enough to have Maslanka come out, and because yeah, I'm gonna get emotional talking about it. It's unbelievable. Oh, woo, yeah, because I always think about, you're in college with these people for 4 years, and they're your best friends, and for that piece to play that, and it's everyone's at the top of their ability level. Every single person in the group. I mean, literally stretched to the top in terms of range, technique, endurance, everything. Every person in that group. I don't care who you are. I don't care how good you are. That's at the top of your, and to put that in and play it. And I'm telling you, when we finished that piece, half the band was crying pretty near uncontrollably. Unbelievable. I'll never forget it. Yeah, that's number one, and is really not a close second.
The flip side of that, is there a piece of band music that you haven't played but you'd like to?
There's a few. I'm going to name all 3 of them. But the one which I don't think I'll ever get to do because it's sort of monumental, To Tame the Perilous Skies, David Holsinger. I've always loved that piece. but that's heavy lifting. There's no way, even as good as the Cape Cod Concert Band is, nope. That being said, these next couple I think are possible, but I've always wanted to play Rocky Point Holiday, and I just never have. And the other one that I really love is Clifton Williams. I think it's Symphony Number 3 or whatever it's called, Fiesta. I love it. I love those pieces, and I've never done them or conducted them. I guess the other one maybe be Whatsoever Things by Mark Camphouse.
So, is there a band that you would like to perform with or conduct that you haven't, either because you're not the right age or you're not in the right geographical place or you don't live in the right time period?
Or I'm not good enough.
People have brought that up.
I
I'll bring that
mean,
up.
I love to, because listen, I graduated with Jason Fettig, and then he goes on to conduct the president's own Marine Band. So I missed my opportunity there because he's retired from that position. So I guess maybe now I'd love to do a little bit more guest conducting, I guess I would say, and just be general about that. I compose original young jazz band music, which how many people are going to have a fifth and sixth grade jazz band like I do? But I really specifically compose music for that. So it's like I can't imagine there ever being, a guest conductor for like elementary jazz band. But I could probably do good with junior high.
The idea is out in the world now.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'd love to do something like that because I think I'd be very good at it, and I have a pretty unique approach to teaching improvisation and style, and so I think that would be really fun just to guest conduct some kids that were pretty into it. But that being said, I'd still take the president's own too. I would conduct that. I mean, playing wise, I'd love to play in like an LA big band like Gordon Goodwin or Tom Kubers or something, or maybe New York based, the Birdland Big Band.
Have you got a favorite band story that you want to tell?
This story is I'll never forget it because it was in 2004 when I was still teaching high school. And that year, I just happened to have the best jazz band in the state. It was not even a question. The band was phenomenal. Perfect storm of having, I had a rhythm section and two of the kids in the band that had a gigging quintet that gigged more than I did. I mean, they went out and played all around town in Cape Cod 2 nights a week and gigged all over the place. So that's our core, rhythm section plus two great improvisers. There were other kids that could improvise and just kids that took it upon themselves to learn every single. We worked on a piece in band one day and there was something that they struggled at. They would have it the next day or definitely by the day after that because they will have worked on it. Like we learned decoupage, Stan Kenton, 5/4 in 2 weeks. I mean, like a high school band. That's how good that band was, anyways. So we were accepted to play at the Massachusetts All-State Conference and had a great performance, very exciting. We stop at a Wendy's on the way back, and we're about half the way back from Danvers at the time was where it was. And so we're about halfway back to Falmouth, and one of our trombone players runs up to the front of the bus and like says something to the bus driver. The bus driver pulls over and he like runs out of the bus. Naturally, we're all like, oh, Todd's throwing up, like, oh, I feel so bad, right? So he gets back on the bus a few minutes later, and this nice girl, Molly, goes and she's like, Todd, are you okay? You want some water? And he's no. And this kid is so straight and narrow, and he is the softest talker in the whole band. Like he's very sort of one of the shyest kids in the entire band, and we're all just really close knit. Still to this day, actually, whenever I see any of those kids, and he just goes so loud. He goes, I effing, but with the actual word, he goes, I effing hate Wendy's. And so like one of the other kids go, oh, so you threw up, man? He's like, no. and then it just got more, he was so open about it, and the kids just start going like, what did you wipe with? And then he's like, some bark on a tree. Like we're dying laugh. Like this kid clearly feels awful. And now the entire bus is bawling, laughing
Yeah.
to the point where at the end of the year banquet, some kids sort of they drew like a cartoon representation of like the bus and him running into the wood. I mean, absolutely hilarious. It's just one of those stories that I will just never forget. I think he's like an Air Force pilot now. He's a good kid.
Well, it has been a pleasure to find out more about your musical work on the Cape and the community band's piece of music and running off buses in a heck of a hurry. On top of which you dodged out of school and went home to record this conversation. So thank you for that. That's kind of above and beyond.
Yeah, I just figured we didn't want to get interrupted by, recess is now indoors. Johnny, please report to the nurse's office. I didn't want to get in,
No matter how much of an air of authenticity it might lend.
Yeah, I know. I did consider that too. That's really funny. That also means now that you'll be on my podcast next. You owe me one.
Which is called Everything Music Ed, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, the Everything Music Ed podcast. It's similar to this. I do talk to people that aren't just band people. And basically the idea behind that podcast is a little bit less about X's and O's, even though we do get into a little bit. But a lot of it just ends up being like trying to figure out why we started doing what we do, just in case now us as teachers can realize, oh, sometimes it's just these, it could be one sentence that you don't even think about that student latches onto and remembers for the rest of their life and changes their entire trajectory.
I am thrilled and honored to be asked, and cross promotion is the thing, baby. So
beautiful. My tens of listeners will be BandWagon transitionees.
Well, as a mutual teacher of ours used to say, if we don't support each other, who the heck is going to?
Very true.
And every podcast person always asks at the end of one of these, is there somewhere online we can find you? And is there somewhere online we can find that podcast?
Yeah, I mean, that podcast is everywhere you get your podcasts. I am not on YouTube like you, but I am on Spotify and Amazon Podcast and Apple Podcast and all that. Everything Music Ed podcast.
Podcaster, trumpeter, conductor, music educator, Tom Borning. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. This was really, really fun.
Thanks a lot, Rob. I appreciate you having me.
And hey, everybody, go see a Falmouth Town Band concert this summer and tell them this little podcast sent you, for heaven's sake.
Thursday nights.
Note to self. Okay, on the other side of this break, I'll talk a little podcast behind the scenes. I hope you'll stay with me for that. Here comes the dogfight. This week's dogfight is another peek behind the podcast curtain. My listenership will know most likely when I'm reading off of prepared scripted remarks and when I'm winging it. Clearly, an interview is going to go where it goes, but the rest of the podcast tends to be scripted. I try to read it as if I were just speaking off the cuff, because no one wants to hear a 6th grade book report being read verbatim in front of the class. But I've written very specific things. Mostly, this is because I am, for better or worse, a crafter of language. I really enjoy expressing my thoughts in very specific ways. Sometimes it's for effect, sometimes it's just to make sure I stay grammatically correct and keep my tenses straight. To begin with, I was a journalism major during my undergraduate life and only pivoted to music education formally when I figured out that grad school was going to need to happen in my life. And that's a story best saved for a future episode. But my point here is, ever since I was introduced to the concept of creative writing in about the 3rd grade, hello, Miss Howe, I know you're Mrs. Parker now, but in any case, you were the first teacher who gave me the encouragement and the framework with which to explore how much fun writing could be. But ever since I began writing for effect and not so much exposition, I've been very interested in doing it well. Also, early in my life, I read books by authors who could do that in such a way that, very often, I will write something and be immediately able to trace its stylistic lineage. Ah yes, that was David Gerald. Ah yes, that was Harlan Ellison. Ah yes, That was Douglas Adams. Ah, yes, that was Groucho Marx. That sort of thing. I talked earlier in this episode about the cottage industry that is the myriad of websites that list national days of observance. Well, there's another internet cottage industry out there that you will be unsurprised to discover I've gone pretty deep into in the effort to make BandWagon, and that's the many YouTube personalities who offer up free advice about how to make and market your podcast. In the first month after I announced the imminent launch of BandWagon, I managed to pare that universe of advice people down to about 2 or 3 people whose advice I thought was on the mark most of the time, and or whose advice changed the way I approached all this for the better. One of the pieces of advice that I recognized was probably useful, but which I planned to resolutely ignore, was this: never read verbatim from a script. Maybe put together some bullet point notes so you don't veer too far off track or so you make your eventual point, but don't write down every single word. It'll make you sound stiff and unfriendly. I write down every single word. Sorry, I just do. And I know at least a couple other podcasters who do too. And a couple of my favorite cable news people read from teleprompters, from scripts that either they wrote or their staff wrote while mimicking their personal style really well. And all those people definitely read from scripts 98% of the time, but they do it in such a way that it doesn't sound stiff and unfriendly and unpleasant to listen to. My podcast statistics page suggests that I've got listeners who download multiple episodes, so my assumption is that if you hate my vocal stylings, at least the content and the message are appealing enough to hang in there. Either that, or you suffer through me to get to my interview guests. I'll take it. So while I wouldn't advise listening to the podcast and saying, oh, there, he went off script right then, because that's no fun really, that's my reasoning for spending what could be considered an inordinate amount of time writing for this podcast. It's what I do, I guess. So while you're thinking about that, one more break, and then it's rounding the turn and heading for home. Thanks for continuing to listen. To wrap up this week, let's take the coda. For the coda this week, a brief request. Tomorrow is the 4th of June, as this podcast drops. Therefore, the 4th of July is just a month away. Time to unpack the marches and the bunting and get in touch with the flatbed truck company, if that's your way of getting to the end of a parade. I bet you can see this coming. I'm interested in hearing tales of the 4th of July from a band perspective. Yep, it's a call to action. I've got a fairly recent story that I'll tell as we get closer to the 4th, and I'd love to hear yours. As always, the way to contribute your stories of patriotic triumph and tribulation on the parade route or on the bandstand follows this music sting. That's BandWagon for this week. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. BandWagon was written, researched, and produced by your humble host. Musical interludes were produced by Hammerton Media, from source material largely by John Philip Sousa. You can listen to more episodes at our website, heyband.podbean.com. Please give me feedback. Be polite, but let me know what you like and what you think might change. Tell me your best band story or suggest a topic for a future episode, whatever you like. You can do that using our email address, heybandwagon@yahoo.com, or leave a 90-second voice message by going to speakpipe.com/heybandwagon. Be aware that we do reserve the right to include your message on the podcast unless you say otherwise. All those contact links and links to this week's news items, conversation topics, and interview guest Tom Borning can be found in our show notes. Please share the show on social media, and thank you for that. If you enjoy this podcast, get somebody else to listen as well. As it turns out, word of mouth is the best recruiting tool. And to keep up every week, subscribe to BandWagon on the Podbean app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please rate the podcast. It really helps other people to find the show. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do all this again next week. I'm Rob Hammerton. Crap, I forgot my neck strap.